When Anna Mitchell lost her husband, her home, and nearly all her hope, no one would have blamed her for giving up. But even in her darkest moments, she still noticed those hurting more than herself. Every Friday for 5 years, she brought a warm meal to the quiet homeless man who sat near the corner of 7th and Willow, a man few others even looked at twice. She didn't know his name, she didn't ask questions, she just showed up. Then one day, long after she had stopped expecting anything in return, 12 Marines in full dress uniform marched into her modest backyard wedding. What they said, and who they brought with them, would leave everyone in tears. Anna Mitchell never imagined her life could unravel so completely, so quickly. Just 2 years earlier, everything had felt safe, ordinary even. She had a modest home on the edge of town, a husband who adored her, and a job at the local library that, while not glamorous, gave her a sense of purpose. She liked the smell of old books, the quiet rustle of turning pages, and the way children whispered secrets to each other between the shelves. Life had a rhythm, predictable, soft, familiar. Then came the call. It was raining the night her husband, Ben, died. He had gone out for groceries, milk, eggs, and a bottle of wine for their quiet Friday evening. On the way back, a delivery truck swerved into his lane on a slippery road. The impact was instant. The doctors said he wouldn't have felt a thing, but that did nothing to ease the ache in Anna's chest, nothing to undo the last words between them, which, as it happened, had been about what movie to watch that night. Something forgettable, something trivial. That's what haunted her most. In the days that followed, she functioned like a ghost. The house seemed too quiet without Ben's humming in the kitchen or his off-key whistling when he folded laundry. She couldn't bear to sleep in their bed, and she stopped opening the mail. Bills piled up. So did the memories she didn't know what to do with. His shoes by the door, a half-drunk cup of coffee on the counter, receipts in his wallet. Little things that made her feel like he might still walk through the door any minute. But he didn't, and the world, indifferent to her grief, kept moving. The second blow came 6 months later, when she lost the house. She had tried to keep up with the mortgage on her own, but the insurance payout barely covered the funeral, and her library job, reduced to part-time due to budget cuts, wasn't enough. She tried selling Ben's truck, pawning jewelry, even dipping into a retirement account that had barely gotten started. But it wasn't enough. When the notice finally came, she didn't cry. She just stood in the empty living room, keys in her hand, and whispered, "I'm sorry," to the walls. She moved into a small basement apartment on the edge of town. It had a leaky faucet, a humming refrigerator, and barely enough space for her bed and a folding table. The walls were thin. She could hear the neighbors upstairs arguing late into the night. She started working double shifts, mornings at the library, evenings waitressing at a diner just off the freeway. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her going, kept the lights on. She stopped seeing friends. Most didn't know what to say to her anymore. Some offered help, but she was too proud to accept. Others just faded away, unsure how to exist beside so much grief. Her world shrank. Days became tasks. Mornings were for surviving. Nights were for staring at the ceiling and hoping she'd feel something again. It was during one of those long, numb walks between jobs that she first noticed him. The man sitting on the corner of 7th and Willow. At first, he didn't stand out. He was just one of the many quiet figures that dotted the city's edges, holding signs, sitting on cardboard, wrapped in tattered coats, even in the summer heat. But something about him caught her attention. He wasn't asking for anything. No sign, no cup outstretched. He just sat, eyes down, knees drawn close, as if trying to disappear. She passed him every Friday evening for weeks, always the same place, always the same posture. She wondered what his story was, if he had one, if anyone had ever asked. One night, carrying a styrofoam box of leftover chicken and mashed potatoes from the diner, she paused. It wasn't planned. She hadn't rehearsed what to say. She just stopped in front of him and said, "Hey, have you eaten?" He looked up, startled. His eyes were tired, bloodshot, but clear. He blinked once, then shook his head slowly. Without another word, she handed him the box. Their fingers brushed for a second. His hands were cold, rough. He mumbled, "Thank you," barely audible. She nodded and walked on, her heart beating faster than it should have. She wasn't sure why. The next Friday, she brought another meal. She didn't tell anyone about it. It wasn't some grand gesture. It didn't feel heroic. It just felt right. He never asked for food, never expected it. But when she handed him the box, sometimes burgers, sometimes pancakes, whatever the kitchen had left, he always looked her in the eye and said, "Thank you." She didn't know his name. He never offered it, and she never asked, but in her mind, she started calling him James. He looked like a James. Weeks became months. The routine grew familiar. Some nights he was gone, and she'd feel a strange pang of worry, but most nights he was there, waiting quietly, like a part of the city itself. She still missed Ben every day, still carried grief like an invisible backpack, but something about this quiet ritual made the load feel a little lighter. It reminded her that even in brokenness, even when you had nothing left, you could still choose kindness, you could still show up. And so she did. Fridays became something Anna looked forward to in a quiet, private way, not with excitement. That emotion still felt foreign, but with a sense of grounding, stability, as if amidst the chaos of life, this one act, this one man, this small gesture gave her something solid to hold on to. While the rest of her week felt like treading water, working long hours, counting every dollar, trying not to sink, Friday nights gave her purpose, even if just for a moment. The man was always there, same spot, same posture, sitting near the bus stop at the corner of 7th and Willow, tucked beneath the flickering orange glow of a street lamp. Most people passed him without looking. Some crossed the street to avoid him altogether. But Anna noticed things others didn't. The way he always kept his shoes tied neatly, even though the soles were wearing through. The way he clutched a weathered backpack tightly to his chest, as if it contained everything he owned, or everything he feared losing again. He wasn't aggressive. He never spoke first. He just existed. Each time she approached him, he seemed both surprised and not. As if he couldn't quite believe someone would return, yet somehow knew she would. That made her wonder, how many people had promised him something and disappeared? How many had looked at him with pity instead of humanity? One night, in the dead of winter, she brought him a thermos of soup, along with the usual meal. The city was colder than usual, one of those bitter, biting January nights where the wind cuts through your coat like a knife. She had wrapped the thermos in a towel to keep it warm and tucked a pair of knit gloves beside it. They weren't new, just something she found in a drawer. She didn't expect a reaction, but when she handed him the bag, his fingers hesitated over the gloves. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for the first time, he smiled. Not a full, beaming smile, just the faintest upward curve of lips cracked from cold. But it was real. That night, as she walked away, she felt something flicker inside her. A tiny warmth, a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. She couldn't name it, but it stayed with her. Over time, their exchanges became a kind of unspoken dialogue. He never said much, sometimes just a thank you, sometimes nothing at all. But there was a deepening trust between them. She began to notice things others wouldn't. The way he relaxed his shoulders when she approached, the way his eyes followed her as she walked away, as if silently saying, "You matter, I see you too." She still didn't know his name. She didn't press. It didn't feel necessary. There was something sacred about the quietness between them, the simplicity of giving without expectation and receiving without shame. She didn't need to know his story to care about him. Sometimes she imagined it, though, filling in the gaps with her own guesses. Maybe he was a veteran. There was something about the way he sat, spine straight, even in exhaustion, hands folded with the precision of someone used to structure. Maybe he'd lost someone, like she had. Maybe he'd once had a family, a job, a home, and now carried those memories in the worn-out seams of his jacket. One night, she noticed a small tattoo on the inside of his wrist, just above where his glove stopped. A set of numbers, faded but deliberate. She didn't ask, but she never forgot it. As the seasons changed, she adjusted what she brought him. In the summer, she packed cold sandwiches and iced tea. In the fall, pumpkin bread from the bakery that discounted their leftovers after 9 p.m. She began tucking small notes into the bags. Nothing dramatic, just, "Hope today was kind to you," or "Stay warm out there." He never mentioned them, but she noticed he always unfolded them gently, read them slowly, as if they deserved attention. Once, in early spring, he spoke more than a sentence. She had handed him a bag with leftover meatloaf and roasted potatoes, still warm, and he looked at it, then at her. "You don't have to do this, you know." His voice was rough, like gravel and rust, and quieter than she expected. She blinked, caught off guard. "I know," she said softly. He nodded once, then looked down at the bag. "But thank you." That was the most he'd said. She didn't press. She just smiled, turned, and walked away with tears stinging her eyes for reasons she couldn't explain. The man never asked for anything, not money, not more food, not explanation, He never asked where she came from or why she kept showing up. He simply accepted what was given with a kind of grace she came to admire. She knew people in her own life who had lost far less and turned bitter, but not him. There was pain in his eyes, deep, old pain, but not resentment. Eventually, the staff at the diner started to notice. "You bringing that to someone?" a co-worker asked one night as Anna carefully wrapped the night's leftovers. "Just a friend," she said. That was the first time she'd said it out loud. A friend. It felt true. Sometimes she wondered if he thought about her during the week, if he noticed her absence on days she didn't pass by. Sometimes she wondered if he knew how much he was helping her, without ever intending to. Because in giving to him, she was healing something in herself, not in grand, cinematic ways, but in slow, quiet moments. A meal, a glance, a thank you. He reminded her that even in the wreckage of her own life, she still had something to give. That kindness didn't need permission or perfection, just intention. And so, she kept showing up, week after week, with food, with warmth, with silence and grace. She still didn't know his name. But in her heart, he was James, and James had become a part of her life, not with fanfare or drama, but with presence. Steady, silent, unforgettable. The winters were the hardest. Even with 2 jobs and a space heater running non-stop in her basement apartment, Anna often went to bed in layers of sweaters, socks, and scarves. The cold seemed to crawl through the cracks in the windows, burrow beneath the door, and settle into her bones. She couldn't imagine what it must feel like to sleep outside, to not have a warm bed, to not have a roof, to not have even the illusion of safety. And yet he was always there. James. He never complained, never looked miserable, even when he clearly was. His face, wind-burned and raw, rarely changed expression. On the coldest nights, Anna would watch his shoulders rise and fall in the distance as he sat tucked beneath the bus stop awning, his only shelter against the icy wind that blew down 7th Street like a punishment. She often wondered if he found somewhere safer when the temperatures dropped too low, but she never asked. It didn't feel like her place. She just kept showing up. Some Fridays, when the wind cut through the city like knives, she would bring more than just food. A scarf she'd knitted during one sleepless night, a pair of thermal socks she found on sale. Once, a small battery-powered hand warmer. She'd tried giving him an old sleeping bag once, but he hesitated. "Too risky," he murmured. "Things get stolen." It struck her how different survival was from living, how every object, every item of comfort, could just as easily become a target, a liability, something someone might fight you for. So she adapted. Smaller gifts, portable, easy to hide. The routine never changed much, but it deepened. She began leaving work a few minutes early on Fridays, just to catch him before the rush of foot traffic swallowed the street. She always brought the food in the same type of brown paper bag, folded at the top, sealed with a piece of tape to keep it warm. She used to worry it might seem condescending, but the way he accepted it, gently, with a small nod, always reassured her. It wasn't charity. It was human. One day in late February, a blizzard hit the city. Everything shut down, the library closed early, and the diner manager told the evening staff not to bother coming in. Anna sat in her apartment watching the snow pile up on the window ledge, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she couldn't afford to sweeten. She thought about him the whole night, wondered if he'd found shelter, wondered if she should have asked him where he went on nights like this, wondered if she should have done more. The next Friday, she held her breath as she turned onto 7th Street. He was there. His beard was frosted at the edges, his coat had a new tear on the sleeve, but he was there. When she handed him the meal that night, warm chili, a cornbread muffin, and a chocolate chip cookie she'd baked from scratch, he didn't say anything at first, just looked at the bag for a long time. Then, quietly, he said, "Thought you might not come." The words knocked the air out of her. "I always come," she said, her voice cracking. He looked at her differently that night, not with suspicion or confusion, but with something like recognition, as if for the first time he fully understood she wasn't just being kind, she was choosing him, again and again. After that, something shifted between them. Still no names, still no life stories, but there was a gentleness in their exchanges that hadn't been there before, a kind of quiet friendship. There was one night, early in spring, when she brought him a meal of roasted chicken and steamed vegetables. Simple, but warm and home-cooked. She apologized that there wasn't dessert. He shrugged. "Food is food," he said. She laughed softly. "You've never tasted my banana bread. That would change your mind." To her surprise, he smiled. A real one this time, small but wide enough to soften the edges of his weathered face. Maybe someday, he said. She never forgot that. But things weren't perfect. Some nights she couldn't find leftovers. Some nights the diner was too busy and short-staffed and she left late, exhausted, clutching a cold sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Once, she arrived to find the street taped off, flashing blue lights pulsing at the end of the block. A nearby gas station had been robbed. She stood there in the cold, bag in hand, wondering if he was safe, if he'd been nearby, if he'd seen anything, if he was hurt. He wasn't there that night, or the next, or the next. She came every Friday, hoping, waiting. A month passed. The food she brought stayed in her passenger seat until it got cold. She started writing his name, James, on the paper bags, even though she didn't know if that was real. It just felt right, like naming a prayer. She asked around. No one knew him. No one had ever asked. To most people, he was invisible. That made her ache. She started carrying the food anyway, just in case. She left it near where he used to sit. Sometimes it was gone the next day, sometimes not. She told herself maybe he had found help. Maybe he was okay. But some nights, as she stared at the ceiling in her tiny room, her heart twisted with the not knowing. Then, one Friday evening, just as the first hints of summer warmth returned to the air, she saw him. He was sitting in the same spot, back against the brick wall, eyes closed against the golden light of dusk. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. He looked thinner, paler, but it was him. She approached slowly, her hands trembling. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded. "Had to disappear for a while. It got rough." She didn't ask for details. She just handed him the bag, banana bread and all. That night, for the first time, he took her hand as he accepted it. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You're the only person who ever saw me." She didn't speak, just squeezed his hand once, then turned to go, tears burning behind her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but that would be one of their last meetings, and she had no idea what was coming. The weeks passed quietly after his return. Anna kept bringing food every Friday, never missing a day, even when her double shifts left her aching and dizzy, even when she had to scrounge from her own pantry to fill the bag. She always found something. It didn't matter if it was rice and beans or just peanut butter sandwiches and fruit. She made sure there was warmth in it, some piece of herself tucked between napkins and foil. Sometimes she scribbled notes again, though less often now. She felt words were no longer necessary. There was something deeper in their silence now. A kind of shared understanding between two people who had been cracked open by life and had chosen, somehow, not to look away from each other. James, though she still didn't know if that was really his name, had become part of her rhythm. In a life where so much had vanished, his presence had grown steady, familiar. On the nights he didn't show, which were rare now, she felt a strange hollowness, as if something had been left unfinished, as if she'd prepared a room in her heart for someone who hadn't arrived. And then came the night everything changed. It was early summer, the kind of evening where the air was thick with humidity and the sky held a slow, amber glow. The sidewalks were filled with people heading to restaurants, couples laughing over gelato, teenagers skating down cracked concrete. Life bustled. But Anna walked with her usual quiet focus, carrying the bag of food and an extra bottle of water. The forecast had warned of a heat wave, and she worried about him in the rising temperatures just as she had in the cold. She turned the corner onto 7th Street and froze. He wasn't alone. 3 men stood near the bus stop, dressed in worn jeans and loose hoodies. One of them had a bottle in his hand. The other was shouting, not words exactly, just noise, the sound of someone looking to be seen or feared. And James, her James, was on his feet, backpack clutched tightly in one hand, shoulders tense. Anna's first instinct was fear. She slowed her pace, not wanting to draw attention. She watched from a distance as one of the men shoved James lightly in the chest. It wasn't a punch, not yet, but it carried warning. James didn't react. He just stepped back, silent, measured. She could see it in the way he moved. Control. Awareness. He didn't want trouble, but trouble didn't care. Before she could move, before she could think, the man with the bottle suddenly swung it low, aiming not to break, but to intimidate, maybe to provoke. James ducked, but the other man kicked his leg out from under him. He stumbled, hit the sidewalk hard. The bottle clattered across the pavement. Anna's body moved before her mind did. "Hey!" she shouted, stepping forward. All 3 men turned. Their expressions were surprise first, then something more dangerous, amusement. One of them smirked. You his girlfriend or something? Leave him alone, she said, gripping the paper bag like it was a weapon. He didn't do anything. Relax, another man said. We were just saying hi to our friend here, right, soldier? That word stopped her cold. Soldier. James was already getting to his feet, brushing gravel from his palms, his face unreadable. But his eyes, those eyes she had come to know so well, were dark with fury. Not at the men, not at the world, but at the humiliation, the exposure. Go, he said, his voice low, controlled. You don't want to be here. But Anna stood firm. You're bleeding. He looked down. There was a small cut on his forearm, dripping down to his knuckles. The men laughed. One gave a mock salute. Then, as if bored, they turned and walked away. She dropped to her knees beside him, food forgotten, hands fumbling for napkins, water, anything. Why didn't you fight back? She asked, her voice shaking. James winced as she pressed the napkin against his arm. Because fighting never solves anything when no one's watching. They weren't going to stop. They just wanted to remind me I didn't belong here. But you do, she said, more fiercely than she expected. You do. He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, his walls cracked. I used to believe that, he said, a long time ago. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. You said soldier. Were you? He didn't answer right away. Then, Marine. Her breath caught. It confirmed what she'd suspected for so long, and yet hearing it still felt like a revelation. Like finding the missing line in a poem she'd read 1,000 times, but never fully understood. How long? She asked. 10 years, he said. 2 tours. Then I came home, and everything fell apart. He didn't elaborate. But he didn't have to. She understood loss. She understood what it meant to return to a world that no longer had space for the person you'd become. She didn't press for more. Instead, she reached into her bag and took out the small banana bread wrapped in plastic and foil. Here, she said. It's not much, but it's yours. He looked at it in silence. Then he said, almost to himself, You're the only person who's treated me like I'm still human. I don't see you as anything less, she said. He opened the banana bread slowly, almost reverently, as if it were something sacred. They sat in silence for a while. The sun dipped behind the buildings. The streetlights buzzed to life. The world moved on around them, but in that moment, everything stood still. Then, without looking at her, he said, My name's not James. She blinked. It's Michael, he said. She smiled, heart full, eyes wet. Hi, Michael. He looked at her then, with a softness she hadn't seen before. Thank you, Anna. That was the first time he'd said her name. Something shifted again that night, something irreversible. She walked home with the empty food bag and a heart too full to hold it all. She thought of Michael's eyes, his voice, the way he said her name, like it mattered, like she mattered. What she didn't know was that Michael would disappear again, but this time, not for long, and not alone. Anna didn't expect a fairy tale ending. That wasn't how the world worked, not the one she knew. Life didn't come with climactic music and poetic closure. It came in small victories, in quiet moments, a steady job, a friend who returned your calls, a Friday night where nobody cried. So when Michael vanished again, she didn't panic, not right away. The first week, she told herself he was probably fine. Maybe he'd found a shelter, maybe he had an appointment with the VA, maybe he just needed space. After all, he'd trusted her with his name. That had to mean something. The second week, the excuses became thinner. She returned to 7th Street, same time, same corner, with a warm paper bag and the familiar hope gnawing at her chest. But the sidewalk was empty. No backpack, no folded blanket, no Michael. By the 3rd week, she stood in the middle of the sidewalk for a long time, food in hand, staring at the place where he always sat. And for the first time in months, she cried. It wasn't just grief, it was fear, the kind of fear that comes when you've opened your heart to someone who never promised to stay. A fear that maybe she had imagined it all, the bond, the warmth, the flicker of humanity they'd built between them. Still, she kept going. Week after week, she returned. The food got smaller, the hope dimmer, but she returned. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, tucked into her mailbox among bills and takeout flyers. A plain white envelope with no return address, her name written in blocky, uncertain handwriting. She almost threw it out, thinking it was a mistake. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Anna, you probably wondered where I went. I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. I wasn't sure I could. I've been trying to fix things, or at least face them. You made me remember who I was. Not the Marine, not the failure, but the man. I can't repay you, but I wanted you to know I'm not lost anymore. You saved me. I don't care if that sounds dramatic. It's the truth. I hope I get the chance to thank you properly one day. Michael. She read it once, then again, gripping the paper so tightly it wrinkled in her hands. He was alive. She held on to that letter like a lifeline. It sat on her bedside table, then on the fridge, then in the drawer where she kept her grandmother's ring and the church bulletin from her brother's funeral, the few things she couldn't bear to throw away. And then she moved on. Not away from him, but forward. Life had taught her that love, the real kind, wasn't always loud. It showed up in whispers, in warm meals, in names spoken like blessings. The day of her wedding came quicker than expected. She hadn't thought she'd ever find someone again. Not after losing so much, not after learning to live with holes in her heart. But then came David, patient, gentle, willing to sit with the parts of her that still ached. He never minded when she mentioned Michael or her brother. He just listened, and he loved her through the silence. They planned a small ceremony, nothing grand, just family, close friends, a garden chapel tucked behind the church she used to attend as a girl. Her dress wasn't designer, but it fit. The flowers were wild, sun-washed and imperfect, just the way she liked them. On the morning of the wedding, she was calm, serene almost, hair curled, dress zipped, bouquet in hand. She stood at the edge of the chapel doors, waiting for the music to swell, for her cue to walk the aisle. Her heart beat steady, grateful, full. Then she heard the murmur, not from the chapel, but from the entryway outside. Whispers, gasps. The church coordinator poked her head in, wide-eyed. "Anna? You might want to see this." She frowned, confused, and stepped toward the double doors that led to the courtyard. They creaked open, and there they were, 12 Marines, in full dress blues. They stood in 2 perfect lines, a silent, living corridor, their shoulders squared, boots polished, gloves pristine, faces solemn, proud, like guardians, like family. And at the front of the line, Michael. He was clean-shaven, his uniform sharp. He looked taller somehow, stronger, but it was the look in his eyes that stopped her heart. He smiled. "Told you I'd thank you properly." She couldn't speak. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes burned. The guests inside the chapel rose to their feet, peeking out through the glass. The air stood still. Michael stepped forward, took her bouquet gently and said, "You gave me dignity when I had none. You reminded me I was still human. And these men, they heard about it, about what you did, not just for me, but for every one of us who's ever come back and felt invisible." Anna glanced at the others, their expressions fierce with emotion. These weren't strangers. These were brothers, some broken, some whole, all carrying stories written in blood and silence. "She saved my life," Michael said, voice quiet but firm. "And we don't let someone like that walk alone." Then he extended his arm. And the others followed one by one, until she was surrounded by 12 Marines forming a path straight down the aisle. The music began to play. Tears streamed down Anna's face. She turned to Michael. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said, "because no one ever showed up for you like you showed up for me." She took his arm, and together they stepped into the sunlight. Not as strangers, not as lost souls, but as proof that kindness, even quiet, fragile kindness, can ripple through time and come back 100-fold. Somewhere in the front row, her mother wept. David waited at the altar, eyes shining. And as Anna walked down the aisle, flanked by the 12 men who carried the weight of war and gratitude in their steps, she finally understood. This was not a fairy tale. This was something better. This was earned.